Welcome to the Studio Business Accelerator podcast. I'm Evan Wedgeworth.
And I'm Mago Lauritsen.
And we're here today to talk about building a team and the dangers and also the benefits that come once you can build a good team. I think a lot of studio owners have mixed feelings about hiring people. They want to hire good people. Maybe they struggle to find those people, seek them out. And then even, we'll talk about this down towards the second half of the podcast. When you do hire someone, are they too good at their job? Are they just going to take over your studio in a coup d'etat? Mago, maybe you could talk a little bit about, the beginning, the problem of trying to find good staff and why we run into this problem.
Yeah, a couple of things. So this isn't, of course, just like finding and maintaining new staff. Being able to consistently hire and ramp people up very, very quickly is not just something that our industry struggles with. That's something that's very, very common in every industry, in every type of business. And if you're in a business that you want to grow, especially in this industry, if you're in a business that you want to grow, you want to scale this business, you are eventually, if you haven't already, going to have to rely on a staff, and you're going to have to be able to put together a team. And that's a challenge. And it's a challenge for a couple of reasons. First of all, most of us who are in this, teaching something in a studio atmosphere are not, we didn't get into this because we had some good, human resources experience and decided that this was a good vertical to get into. That's not the reason we made the decision, right? We made a very emotional decision about what we teach. We loved it. We thought we were passionate, thought it was going to make a big impact on our communities. And so we got into it and then realized, hey, there's all of these other skills that we have to develop as well. And so most of us didn't have that skill. I for sure didn't have that skill when I first got into this, and have had to develop that and figure out systematically exactly how to do a good job of that, and then repeat that process and then train other people to do that for me. So just so everybody knows, I don't even do most of the interviewing and job posting and that kind of stuff for my studio locations anymore. I have other people who do that, and I'll step in every once in a while and kind of make the final decision on things, or meet the person in person before we kind of pull the trigger on hiring them, depending on what the position is. But for most of the hiring that we do now in our businesses, like I'm not directly as involved in that. We have people who have been trained to follow the systems that we teach on how to do that, and can implement that for us, right? So but it's a challenge, and it's a hard thing to do, and a lot of people are kind of afraid to do it, and I don't blame them. Okay, it's not their fault. It is a challenging thing to do, and it is a risky thing to do. How many horror stories have we heard from studio owners that have brought somebody applying in your intro there, and then, there's been a falling out or some kind, or somebody's, kind of gets a little bit greedy and decides that they're going to take a bunch of the advanced students, usually the ones that are paying the most money most of the time, and move down the street and open your new competition location, right? And then you have to compete with people that they've kind of taken from all the hard work that you put in. We hear that story all of the time. It doesn't need to happen. I can't, of course, guarantee that will never happen to me, but in the decades that I've been running studios, it has never happened to me, and I don't anticipate that it will. And we'll talk about, why that is and kind of how we hedge ourselves against those issues a little bit later in the podcast. But there are a couple of things that it's important for us to understand that we're up against. Okay. One of the things that we're up against is that the people that are generally the most active looking for a job, is there any sort of guarantee to people who will perform the best if we hire them? There's not. There's no correlation between the active pool of people out there most actively looking for a job and how well they will perform on the job. As a matter of fact, the opposite is probably true. And I don't mean to imply here that everybody who's actively looking for a job right now is a bad employee, right? That's not what I'm implying. But there is evidence that people that are the least actively searching for new employment are very good employees. They're performing very well. They have job satisfaction. They're happy with where they're at. They're not looking for new opportunities at all. They're not actively looking. There's a reason that they're not actively looking for new jobs. And if those people are employed, it's generally because they're doing a good job and like where they're at, right? That makes sense. And so, if there was a way for us to convince those people to come work for us, we would actually do a better job of hiring people over the long term consistently, because generally those people are good at performing on the job. Those people are really good at that. The problem with hiring those people, obviously, is that it comes with what we call a very high switching cost. They're happy where they're at. You better have an exceptionally compelling offer to get that person to leave their schedule, their guaranteed, income, their social circle, and all of those other things that come with that job. You better have a really, really compelling offer to get those people to move. So there's this other sort of place in the middle, right? Where the people that are not necessarily the most active looking, but that are every once in a while kind of out there looking for a job, like that's the target market that generally we want to be going after, right? They're not so happy in their current positions that we can't pull them away. They're not too expensive to pull away, in other words. But they're also not so actively, searching for a job that they're desperate and will take, something that may not be best for them and they know isn't best for them, but they just need to pay the bills next month, and so we can kind of mitigate that risk a little bit by the filtering process, of course, and the interview process, but most importantly, by looking for potential employees that are not necessarily in that most active pool. We want them kind of just below that surface. They're gainfully employed, maybe they're performing very well in their current positions. And can we come up with an offer for them that's compelling enough to bring them over to where we're at? We just do a better job of finding the right people if we do that. Once again, do not mean to imply that you shouldn't hire somebody because they're actively looking. There are plenty of good performers, good employees that are in that pool as well, and some that are very desperate, especially right now as we're coming out of COVID and things, that people that just absolutely need jobs. So don't mean to imply that, but I just mean to say don't not go looking in the places where the best performers are, right? That's one piece. But most people are, right? And when we hire, we want to hire people slowly and we want to fire people quickly. That's the mantra. We want to make sure that we're making the right decision. And most of the time when we're hiring somebody new, we're hiring them because somebody just quit and we need that position filled right now, or we're launching some kind of new project and we don't really know what the job is like yet because it's a new thing. So that also puts us at a big disadvantage when we're trying to bring on new talent and get these people trained. So the direction I'm going here, I hope everybody understands, is that this is not an easy thing to do. The deck is stacked against you. Another reason that the deck is stacked against you that I think is important to understand is that let's imagine you're going to draw on a piece of paper a square and put a little cross in those. You're going to draw on a piece of paper a square and put a little cross in those. So you have a quadrant, right? You got 4 little squares that make up a bigger square, a little quadrant. And let's label the top axis of that quadrant people that are good at interviewing and people that are bad at interviewing, right? And then the left-hand axis, we're going to label that people that are good at performing well on the job. They're going to come in and do a good job. And people that are not going to come in and do a good job. You're going to make a hiring mistake and they're going to come in and eventually open your competitive studio down the street or whatever, right? Whatever indicates that they're not that. Well, of those 4 quadrants on this little layout, if the person is good at interviewing and also good at performing on the job, and you just happen to hire that person, you made the right decision, right? You made the right decision. But you're out of luck in every other quadrant on that. If the person is not good at interviewing and they're awkward and a little bit nervous and exhibit some anxiety, person is good at interviewing and they're not good at performing on the job, and you're not running your interview process the right way to figure that out, you're going to make the mistake of hiring a person that's not going to be good. The other quadrant, if they're bad at interviewing and bad at performing, you won't hire that person, but you're still out of luck because now you don't have an employee, right? And that sort of, I guess you could think of it as the top right quadrant there, where they're not good at interviewing, but they would have been a good performer for you. They would have been a great team member for you. The really big problem with that quadrant is that you will not hire that person and you will never know that you made a mistake. You'll never know. You'll think you made the right decision because they weren't good in the interview, but you will never know that could have been the best employee that you ever brought on. So that deck, man, is just absolutely stacked against you for all of those reasons. And so it is not your fault that you're scared or worried or don't like or don't think that you can find good people out there. That's not, it is hard to find good people, but it's not because out there. That's not, it is hard to find good people, but it's not because humanity is bad. It's because of all these other mathematical reasons that deck is literally stacked against you, right? It is literally stacked against you.
Yeah. And, You've talked a little bit too about in the interview itself that it can, it, we, as someone conducting the interview, going into it ahead of time, maybe we don't take a look at our own biases and correct for them. And so maybe sometimes you find yourself really getting along with this person. And the reason for that, it turns out, is they're just like you. They have many of the same opinions. They share the same viewpoint, and it's easy to talk with them and converse with them. And that's one reason that maybe to not hire them, because you don't necessarily want your viewpoint replicated across the entire organization. Then the organization is not diverse. It's fragile and brittle, and information. I was
that mistake, by the way, is so common in the world of recruiting and hiring that it has a name. It's called hiring in your own image, right? That's what it is.
Right.
And it's an absolute problem. Yep.
Just on the subject of not correcting for your own biases, years and years ago, I lived in Washington, D.C., and I worked for a bike shop there that is no longer in business, which is not a coincidence. It's called...
Wait, it's not a coincidence because you worked there, or it's not a coincidence because of the story that you're about to share?
I should have thought about how that sounded when I said it. I just mean my experience there was not unique, and it's not a coincidence this bike shop is no longer in business. And this was a shop that had a real legacy. They had been around for, I think, about 40 years, and they closed maybe 5 years after I left, which was a real shame. But it was right up on Capitol Hill, and just a great look. I think about 40 years, and they closed maybe 5 years after I left, which was a real shame. But it was right up on Capitol Hill, and just a great location among all these shops and restaurants. And I was pretty young at the time. I'd always wanted to work for a bike shop. Really loved bikes. Super excited, and got hired. And it was kind of a lukewarm job for a while. And then I started to realize so many things were falling through the cracks, and that me being hired was one of those things where it was just a last minute off the cuff decision. And the owner, who was so nice and friendly, but had so little organization that it really was causing some problems, I think had done the typical thing of, I'm just going to focus on the problem that's right in front of me, and I'm not going to think about anything else. And started going wrong was one time I was going up the street to Starbucks or something to get a coffee, and I mentioned this to her, and she said, "Oh, will you get me a coffee too?" And I said, "Yeah." And then she looked at me and she said, "Peanut butter." And then she turned around and walked away, and I was like, "Yeah, okay." And then the whole walk up there, I was like, what the heck does peanut butter mean? And then I spent a while looking at the menu of just the Starbucks, looking for anything that might be peanut butter or peanut butter flavored or whatever. No clue. Nothing. I had no idea. So I just got her a coffee. I went back to the shop. I gave her the coffee, and then I went up to the front desk and I asked the guy who, my coworker there, I was like, Denise just told me peanut butter. What does that mean? She was like, oh, that means she likes her coffee to be the exact color of peanut butter once you add cream and sugar to it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I understand now. And it was that color of peanut butter once you add cream and sugar to it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I understand now. And it was that small detail was replicated everywhere, where she had never sat down and thought, is this person going to understand what I mean when I say peanut butter? And how can I provide a structure for them so that they know what their responsibilities are when I send them out to get coffee and, the cream, all that kind of stuff. It was just ridiculous.
Man,
it was not a good place to work.
I'm going to steal that metaphor, man. That is such a great example, not just for what we're talking about today, but even on the last episode of the podcast, and this is going to be a recurring theme. The founders of studios and the owners of studios, like, they generally have a vision, right, of where things ought to be and what things ought to be like and what the expectations are and what they're trying to accomplish. And I know that when I started out, I absolutely failed at helping others assume that everybody else understands what it is we're saying when we talk a certain way. And that's a great example of that, Evan. That's a great example of that breakdown in communication. That's not because she's not arguably a bad person. It has nothing to do with that. It wasn't like she was the evil boss from some, Hollywood movie or whatever. That wasn't the issue. It was just that there was that breakdown of communication there, and people can't get behind a vision when that's the case. That's a great example. Yeah, that's a great example. When I first moved to Colorado Springs, we were of course planning to open studios and grow our programs and that kind of stuff. But I actually had to go get a little job. I worked for a law firm for a while, handling their marketing for them, and answering. I would interview prospective clients, and was compiling some data and doing those kind of things and deciding whether or not we should bring them on as clients, all that kind of stuff. Right? And tracking what marketing was working and all those kind of things. Like, they'd hired me to do this thing, but I had very little understanding. Like, I don't have a legal background or anything. They handled family law and did some financial stuff, bankruptcies and those kind of things. And I understood very little about that. And there was no way for me to there was no training system to bring me on, right? There was no way to kind of educate me on those things and help me to be a more effective employee. And it was just one frustration after another for me personally, because as I was developing questionnaires and marketing pieces and tracking systems and that kind of stuff, I wasn't 100% sure ever if I was performing well or not. There was no sort of built-in feedback of, hey, we need you to do this better and here's how you do it, right? That just never happened in that job. Absolutely frustrating to me. Job didn't last. I didn't stick around, man. The moment, that was part of the motivation for me to make my buys with that, man. It is when the systems are not in place and the vision is not clear, everybody suffers, man. It's not just the owners of the business who are not hitting goals. It's the staff members as well. And I think that's a really good point. That's pretty timely right now. As we're recording this podcast right now, we're sort of coming out of COVID, and kind of what's happening in the news cycle is there's a lot of talk about, minimum wage being raised and, people not wanting to come back and work because they're making still a lot of money on sort of staying on unemployment and that kind of stuff. And all of the focus right now is on, we need to pay people more. Now, I personally tend to lean a little bit progressive on that. And I do think personally that we should pay people well. We should. That should be part of the equation. But I don't think that, as I'm talking to people in my own circle, at least, I don't think, other business owners and also other people looking for jobs, I don't think that money's the biggest factor here. I really don't. As I'm talking to people in my own circle, at least, I don't think, other business owners and also other people looking for jobs, I don't think that money's the biggest factor here. I really don't. I think that a lot of people spent a lot of time thinking during COVID. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people showed up to Zoom meetings wearing a nice shirt and sweatpants or no pants, and they made some they made some decisions about life, and they're like, hey, I don't want to go back to a bad job. I don't want to go back to a crappy job and work on a in a frustrating system, and I'm going to go look for something better, and I'm going to take some time to do that. And I think that's really what's driving this. And money, of course, is a piece of it, and we should always pay our staff members and our team members a fair wage. I think that's of course something that we should be doing. But where we have a whole heck of a lot of control is over the perception of the quality of this job. And when these people are applying for our jobs, and when they're responding to our ads, and they're doing all these other things, that we're able to position ourselves in a way where these people are going, oh man, I would love this job. And it has nothing to do with the wage, right? Pay them a fair wage, but it's not just that they're excited about. There's something else. And I just think fundamentally, for us ourselves and for our staff members, if we're going to be in a position where we're hiring people, that it's immoral for us to ask people to trade the hours of their lives for dollars. It's just not a good thing to ask people to do. We should compensate them. We should do that. That's part of how our world works that we live in. But there should be some other reason that they're coming on, and it shouldn't be just because of the financial compensation, right? There should be some other sort of visionary thing and higher level messaging, like we talk about in your marketing, as you're also advertising the positions at your studio. And I don't mean that once you bring them in, they find that out. I mean, those are the kinds of people that we're going after, right? The people who are behind that vision, and that's the reason that they want to be working for you. And I know, like we had a couple of examples as we were talking about this topic today of, what it's like when this doesn't work well. one of the big sort of fears in our industry, in the instructional studio industry, is that your staff will eventually, befriend all of your students and parents and then open your competition down the street. But that's not the only, negative to all of this. I talk to studio owners all the time that have hired staff and they're still working 60 hours a week, and not because they want to. I mean, some of them, more power to you. If you want to go teach and you love it and that's what you want to do to occupy your time, my guess is you're probably self-medicating against something else that's horrible in your life, if that's that's what you're really like looking forward to. But like, yeah, right. And like that's not a healthy place to be either. It's like, now we got this robust staff and we have all these students and I'm still working 60 hours a week and nobody's making any money. Sure, maybe you're making an impact on your community and having an impact on these student lives, but what if you could have all of it, right? What if you could have all of it? And so putting that right team together is key to kind of breaking out of that piece and being able to avoid what can just be, I guess another way of saying this is, a lot of people think, what's the worst that could happen to my business? Well, it could go under and it could go out of business. No, absolutely not. That's not the worst thing that could happen to your business. That might be the best thing that could happen to your business. And if it happens, hopefully it happens very, very quickly, because then you can go on and try something else and figure out a place in life where you can thrive. The worst thing that can happen, that's the worst thing, right? That's for sure. That's even worse than your staff member taking a bunch of students and opening a competitive studio down the street. So I guess my point is there's a lot of ways this can go wrong. And so focusing on this and making sure you do it the right way, absolutely key. Absolutely key.
Yeah. And another problem this causes, we stress to our clients all the time that your job as the owner of the business is to be working on your high level messaging, reinforcing the messaging, and then delivering on the promise that you're giving your students and your staff. And if you have bad staff who you can't trust to handle things, then you don't free yourself up to really do that. It's difficult to get your head up above the daily morass of irritating details and to start thinking about like, okay, are my students, do I have the kind of students who they start dancing when they're irritating details, and to start thinking about like, okay, are my students, do I have the kind of students who they start dancing when they're 11 years old? I'm confident they can get into a good college, or I'm confident they can stand up for themselves in a conversation, or that they can make good decisions for themselves. Those, of course, are all the things that we want for students underneath us. But it's difficult to spend any time thinking about that, or to really constructively evaluate how your studio is running and how it will actually deliver that kind of thing to the students when you're like, oh God, Sally didn't show up to teach her class again. Now I got to go teach this. Or you're running over like, hey, can you teach this class? And blah, blah, blah. Mago, I know you briefly owned a yoga studio for a little while and had about 67 different instructors teaching 205 classes, and I remember that it was a nightmare, and especially if you have to drag you down, you're going to be stuck in that quagmire for a very long time. Absolutely. And there's a lot of fear of handing off responsibility. I mean, I'm as guilty of that as just about anybody, because I could do this better, and so therefore I'm going to do it instead of handing it off to staff. Well, I don't know, like I actually asked this question recently in one of our Facebook groups, the Business Studio Accelerator group, I think. And I just asked the question, it's like, hey, if your business is overly dependent on you, if that's not a sign of success, what is it as a sign of? And the answer that nobody gave that I sort of secretly wanted to give was narcissism. If you haven't figured out yet how to get other people to do the things that we need them to do, like there's a problem there. And maybe part of the problem is that you have this feeling of self-importance. Not always the time, but like I do recognize that historically in me in the past, and hopefully something I'm better at now. I tell the story sometimes of when, I hired to have this feeling of self-importance. Not always the time, but like I do recognize that historically in me in the past, and hopefully something I'm better at now. I tell the story sometimes of when, I hired the first, you were around at the time when I hired Terrence to teach some of my classes. And like, there was this piece of me I noticed that like secretly hoped that people would complain about his classes and not like them as much because
he wasn't Mago, like there was
Right.
this piece of me
Yeah.
that sort of felt that way, and like how guilty I felt after I realized what I was kind of doing. It's like, man, we're never going to be able to grow this thing and scale this thing if we don't actually, get past that and get over that and get this not just about me doing a better job. And by the way, just to once again let the cat out of the bag a little bit here, part of the secret to that is you will never have staff members that, well, that's not true. The founder, there's something that I call the founder's advantage, where the founder of the business will be better at some things because they have a new student, and I decide that this student has a specific situation that I'm willing to wheel and deal on. As the founder of the business, I can wheel and deal with them because I could decide that I want to change that. I want to make this concession for this particular situation. Your staff can't do that, right? You're not going to give them that power necessarily to do that. So there's some things that like give you an advantage as the founder of the business that your staff members don't have. And so there's a lot of things at the business that it's not fair for you to compare yourself to your staff and say, I could do this better and therefore I'm going to. So the way that we solve the problem, though, is that we make the business hyper profitable before we make it hyper efficient. Because then you can afford to bring on staff members that might not be as good as you in some of these things. And they might, especially as you're training them and ramping them up, they might be making mistakes and they might, not be as good at some of the things that you are good at. And so can we compensate by that? But let's set up the business in a way that it's hyper profitable first, rather than, the Walmarts of dance studios we always talk about, where it's, pay $54 a month and a little registration fee and whatever. Walmarts of dance studios we always talk about, where it's, pay $54 a month and a little registration fee and whatever. We make the business hyper profitable, then we can afford to not have to be hyper efficient right away, and we work on that over time, right? So that's part of the solution there. I think I got on my soapbox. I hope I didn't just take us off the right topic there, but I think those are important things to understand. Let's shift here, maybe go in the direction of what does it look like when you do this the right way?
Yeah,
right.
Definitely. I think probably a lot of studio owners are familiar with the pain that we're describing here. Maybe we could talk about the idyllic vision and what it's like when you do get things lined up correctly. Maybe you can talk a little bit from the owner's point of view. I can talk a little bit from the non-owner's point of view.
Well, I'd be interested in your input there. Why don't you talk a little bit about your experience working with us and those kind of things, and what you think it is that maybe how your story of what's been a little bit different though.
Sure. Yeah. I've spent a long time thinking about what it is about this job and what I do that I enjoy, that I particularly enjoy. And one of the things that I came to realize is that other jobs that I've had, and I think this is the norm, is that when people talk about having a work-life balance, it means almost like I'm going to draw a wall between my personal self and my work self, and they're not really going to bleed too much into each other. And so what I have to offer in my work is different from what I have to offer in my personal life. And so whatever experiences you have in your life with friends, family, other pursuits, hobbies, that kind of thing, they never cross that wall. And that's a disadvantage both for you, the employee, and for the business. That pursuits, hobbies, that kind of thing, they never cross that wall. And that's a disadvantage both for you, the employee, and for the business itself, because you have less to offer the business. But of course, this relies on a business that is able to grow and adapt to those kinds of things from their employees. If you run a really large business where you have very rigid standards of what you need, you have to force your employees into little boxes. I don't think that that's the case for most of our clients, most of the people that we're talking to on this podcast. And so what I've learned is that the things that I can bring to the table are different from the things that any other staff member brings to the table, and that I should be doing those things. This podcast is even kind of an example of that, and we hope that other people can take some lessons from what we have. But it's private thoughts bleeding into public forum and work life. By far the best, well, not the best, but by far the easiest, least inconvenient thing about working for a good organization is that you can trust other people to handle things. And so my job mainly is tech and software, and that stuff needs to get tested and before we push it out live onto the software clients. And if I can just send an email real quick to Anna, one of our other team members, to say, here's the new software stuff, it needs to get tested and put through its paces. Can you handle that? And then I know that she knows what to do. She can handle it. Nicole, who we had on a previous podcast, if I ask her anything, she has an answer. She can go perform the task, right? I don't have to try to micromanage other people, which is such a poisonous thing when, especially when it's bad when to micromanage the employees, but it's even worse when the employees micromanage each other, because then it becomes a very much sort of a power struggle. Like, well, you don't have authority over me. Get out of here. Why are you trying you don't even know what you're talking about. Get out of here. And just the lack of that kind of thing is something I think should not be understated. I personally value it a lot, and I think it's one of those things that when it's weighing you down, makes your life so much worse. The daily grind of is this person taking care of what they need to do versus I just send this off and it's good. Imagine if you're an instructor and you teach these 4 classes a week or whatever, but other instructors aren't showing up to teach the classes and you're constantly getting called last minute. Hey, can you cover so-and-so's class? Blah, blah, blah. That kind of thing is not fun. So the lack of that is enormous, I think. On the theme of personal life bleeding over into work life is that if the place that you work for does have some kind of mission statement and some values and even an ethos, then as long as you agree with that and you can get behind it, then you can start to look for things that now you can do to reinforce that message that the business owner or the other employees might not think of or may not have time to consider. Like I said, I think each employee is going to have their own life, their own experiences to bring to the table. And when you have, say, 10 employees and all of them are competent and can do their job well, and all of them have different life experiences, and then all of them believe in the mission, and then they start to say, hey, I was thinking this thing the other day, or I saw this, or I was reading this, and what if we did things this way? I think believe in the mission, and then they start to say, hey, I was thinking this thing the other day, or I saw this, or I was reading this, and what if we did things this way? I think then you get an organization that is much more fun to work for, much more fulfilling, and is more flexible. And so as an employee, that even if maybe you're having a bad day or a bad week, that down the road things will get better versus being stuck in this constant Groundhog Day of, oh, this is terrible. And there's no room to change, right? Because your personal life is of no relevance to your job, which is not a fun place to be.
It's really, really hard. Yeah, it's really hard. And I also, I want everybody to understand who's listening to this that I used to be really, really bad at this as well. Like, this is something that we've had to develop and learn over time. And it's not just a coincidence that the teams that we run in the business as staff members, I like hanging out with them. You were talking about that work-life balance. I don't feel like I have to, hide who I really am when I'm at work or anything like that. And I just I genuinely enjoy talking to these people and hearing about what they're doing and working on and helping them to accomplish their own goals in their lives. And that's just a really fun place to be as the business owner. So it's really good and fulfilling for me as well now, but it was not always. It was not always. And, I think as we're talking about what it looks like when this works really well, we had a great conversation on our mastermind group call with our clients this week that I kind of wanted to share a little bit with everybody. One of the newer members of that group, and that's one of our higher level groups. These folks have already put our base camp training and things in place, so they know what they're doing, and they're running profitable businesses, and they're getting a lot of students in and enrolled and those kind of things. So they've kind of all got that foundational, what we call our base camp program stuff put in place. And we always joke about how when you come into one of our consulting programs, like, we're going to cause you new problems. We're not going to get you to a place where you're like, oh, I have no more cares in the world, right? We're not. We're going to cause you new problems. They're going to be good problems, but they're going to be different than the problems that you've been probably struggling with in the past. And this particular studio owner, she was pretty much devastated by COVID because she'd been teaching for a couple of decades in the school systems and running after school programs and using their facilities and that kind of stuff. And then when COVID hit, absolutely tanked it and shut it down, and then had the bravery to, in that environment, reach out to us and say, what can I do? And then came into one of our programs and just in the last, I don't have the exact numbers, so nobody quote me on this, but it was something like she did 87 enrollments or something like that in, 12 weeks or something ridiculous and this is not in the school systems now. This is in a new location quickly and has put herself in a position now where we caused her new problems. And she has to bring on staff. It's not possible for her in the way that she's designed this business now to just run the thing by herself anymore, which is something she's been doing for decades, right? And so doesn't have a lot of experience with bringing people on and training people and ramping it up and attracting and interviewing the right kinds of people and making the right decisions. It doesn't have any of those systems. So we've kind of helped her sort of put the framework for that in place. And she came to the group call very concerned because this first person that she's planning on hiring now, she went through the process that we teach and the interview and a little bit of training and has offered the job to the person. And the person's response was just overwhelming. Like they were like so excited. And she came to her, this new employee came to her and said, hey, maybe we could work on some things together. And, I was thinking about buying a building and maybe we could, and like had all of these ideas that she was like super enthusiastic about. And this kid, and she came to her, this new employee came to her and said, hey, maybe we could work on some things together. And, I was thinking about buying a building and maybe we could, and like had all of these ideas that she was like super enthusiastic about. And this client of ours came to us and said, man, I'm worried about this. Is this a red flag? Is this person going to be in a position where they're going to try and, take over my studio or open up a competitive thing down the street or whatever. And I had to like take a step back. I was like, maybe we're going to teach you a bunch of other things to implement so that doesn't happen. But keep in mind here that when I hired my first employee many, many years ago, she didn't come back the second day. Right. And you think about the difference between my experience, right, where I did such a lousy job of interviewing and demonstrating value to that staff member and training them when I brought them in the first time, that they just didn't even come back. They just ghosted us. They didn't return calls. They didn't get to, this client's experience where she brought somebody on who is so enthusiastic and sees the vision from day one that they want to be more involved, right? Now, yeah, is there a risk that this person is too enthusiastic? Of course, that could be an issue. But you compare my first hire to my most recent hire. The most recent person that we hired just part-time to teach a few of the classes at the studio. Now, generally, we're trying to make these jobs, we're trying to hire people to take on more hours than we hired this most recent job to come on. We would prefer that our staff we have smaller staff working more hours rather than the opposite, which is generally the trend in the industry. We're bucking against that system. But this new hire that we have, her name is Logan. We just hired, part-time. She's only working 4 or 6 hours a week, something like that right now. We walked her through the interview process. We made the offer. We signed all the paperwork. We just hired, part-time. She's only working 4 or 6 hours a week, something like that right now. We walked her through the interview process. We made the offer. We signed all the paperwork. We put her through a few hours of our initial training. We call it our Compete Services core training. We put her through that. And then that evening, she contacted us and said, hey, listen, I've never had this kind of experience starting a new job in my life. And I've worked at lots of studios and lots of places. If there's any way that I can come work for you full time, I will quit my other jobs and come work for you guys instead. Unsolicited. That's what she said, right? Unsolicited. And that's my most recent hire. You compare that to where I was, with that first one. And then this client that had this concern, you compare that to her experience. No wonder she's overwhelmed. She's like, wait a minute, it's like red flags going off and she's worried about this. But that's actually the kind of reaction that we want. We want these people to go, oh man, I would give anything to be on this team. And neither one of those has anything to do with how much you're paying them. As a matter of fact, this client of ours brought this new staff member on at a 45% pay cut from her previous gig. Now, I'm not saying that that's what you should do. I'm just pointing out that it was not the money. It was not the money. It was the vision that she was able to put in place. And can you imagine having a team that's all like that? That's all like, oh man, how can we make this thing better? How can we have a bigger impact on more people's lives and live in a better community because of that, right? That's what that looks like when you do that the right way. And I just thought that was kind of, serendipitous that happened to both her and to me in the last week. And that's the kind of reaction you should be getting when you're bringing these people on the right way. They're enthusiastic. They're ready to go. They're looking for sacrifices to make so that they could be part of it.
And we now live in various parts of the country, so it's always fun to get together and hang out. And I had a long conversation with Nicole, who was on the podcast previously, and Anna, one of the other staff members, just hanging out late after everything was done. And I learned, even though I've worked with Nicole for however many years, I realized I didn't know her very well as a person. And I learned that a lot of her background is different from mine. A lot of her opinions are different from mine. And I think it's as just a human being in the world, you're going to naturally gravitate to people who agree with you. And that can be a little bit poisonous sometimes, because you forget that there are these other human beings who have these different opinions.
Right.
Who are no less interesting but poisonous sometimes, because you forget that there are these other human beings who have these different opinions. Who are no less interesting and no less intelligent, and
they're not bad, right?
And they're not bad, right? And we had such a long talk with Nicole, and that talk has stuck with me. I think I've thought about that evening, having a conversation with her every week since the live event without fail. And it's changed some of my opinions about how I approach conversations with other people. And that kind of thing wouldn't have happened if the team weren't in place and if we didn't all work in the same place. I think that as the owner of the business, you're not always going to get to see that kind of thing. You're not going to be present for those kinds of experiences necessarily, but that, we talk a lot about demonstrating value and providing a service for the students, but you are providing a service for your staff as well. If you do think in a way that you can help them with their own lives. And we've said many times, what we care about is having an impact on the community, and your staff is part of your community. The ways that you can bring people together in a job is a little bit unlike the ways that you can bring together people in other sorts of activities that are voluntary. If I had to go, do a bowling league or something. I hate bowling. I would never go to a bowling league. But if I did go to some kind of bowling league, I wouldn't necessarily. And I talked to Nicole outside of it. I wouldn't necessarily pick her to be on my team because I'd be like, she doesn't agree with anything I say. But now that I know her, and I'm thankful that she's there.
Yeah, I think I'm going to kind of jump off that, use that as a jumping off point as well too, because I see in a lot of the marketing for many studios, we have Atmosphere or something like that, and they're talking about what it means to kind of be a family, and using that as, this banner that they wave, which I don't think is bad, but I think it's maybe a little bit naive and a little bit misunderstood. And, what does it mean to be a family? We talk about, what is it like with my staff? Like, if I'm trying to create this sort of family of people that sort of trust each other and work together behind the vision, family doesn't necessarily mean that you always get along and agree. Like, I can think of, plenty of extended family members that that's not the case ever, right, with me. And so, like, the definition of family is not necessarily that there's no conflict or that there's nothing challenging that ever happens or that everybody gets along all the time. That's just not the case. That's not part of any definition of family that I know. So I've struggled over the years to decide, well, what is this? If I'm trying to build whatever this family, like, I don't even use that term anymore, atmosphere is in my staff. What does that mean? And to me, what it means, I can kind of distill it down to the idea that it's a group of people that have an unreasonable dedication to each other, right? Like, I might reason myself through helping somebody whose car broke down on the side of the road, and I might, come up with a good, reasonable justification for that. But there's plenty of things that I would do for my family members, for my parents, and for my siblings, and things that I don't have a reasonable justification for why I would make that much of a sacrifice to help these people. So as I'm kind of trying to build that atmosphere in my own studio, that's kind of one of the standards, one of the guidelines that I follow is we're not trying to all get along. We're not trying to all agree here all of the time. What we're trying to do is trust each other enough that we're willing to be unreasonably dedicated to each other. And that experience that you had with Nicole is we want to create those types of experiences with our staff members. How can we get our staff members to understand each other and appreciate each other on a more intimately social level, so that they can appreciate the challenges, dreams, goals? We can all work together to help each other, support each other in each other's dreams, and throw rocks at each other's enemies, right? Like, how do we do that for each other? And getting that sort of more intimate social awareness of each other is a huge piece of that, right? We're not automatons, we're not robots. That's just part of how human beings function. And somebody else asked me this. This also happened on this. We were talking about staffing on our kind of our more advanced group call this week. Somebody was asking, well, how do you build that trust, and how do you go about that? And one is to kind of artificially create these experiences where people can create those more intimate social relationships. So that's a piece of it. But I think another piece of it that is really important is probably the easiest place to do it, where you can have this idea and you can have this goal and we have this vision, and then we intentionally find ways to have people be bringing their ideas together at those meetings and challenging each other a little bit. And sometimes when you first start that and you start trying to manage that, it's not comfortable. And that's the point. And so you as the owner or the manager needs to be in a place where you can, reinforce to everybody that, hey, this is really good. I know we don't see eye to eye on this. We don't agree with this. So let's figure out what we're going to all get behind, because, da-da-da. And like you're sort of doing this intentionally in a way where you do create this tension. Because if you find yourself in a position where everybody agrees on what the best path forward is all of the time, you're in trouble. That is what you call that fragility, right? That is a fragile organization, and you are setting yourself up for some failure. Either you're not confronting large enough challenges, or you're naive and you've hired that fragility, right? That is a fragile organization, and you are setting yourself up for some failure. Either you're not confronting large enough challenges, or you're naive and you've hired in your own image, like we talked about earlier, and you're going to miss out on opportunity, and you're going to be blind to many of the challenges that come up, because that always happens to every business, right? There's nothing ever goes as we plan it to. Nothing ever does, right?
Last minute thoughts.
Yeah, I think we went over a lot of stuff today, and this is a challenging thing. I think most importantly, maybe the take-home message is that we need to be intentional about this. Just like we have systems for marketing our studios, just like we have systems for how we're going to onboard people, just like we have systems that the things that we say on the phone when we pick up the phone, we put all those business systems in place. We need to have systems in place that will help us to have to hope that we're going to find the right people. There's once again the deck is stacked against you, and it's not going to work by itself. We need to be intentional about the systems that we're putting in place to both onboard and manage and train the staff members, so that we end up where we want to be.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to end. If you'd like to find us online, you can apply to work directly with us. $1,000,000dancestudio.com. You can read about what we're about and how we do what we do. You can also join the Facebook group, has the same name of this podcast, Studio Business Accelerator. There's a bunch of dance studio owners in there, and they're talking about many of the same topics that we're going over here on the podcast. So it's a good place to hear more of this kind of stuff. Thank you very much for listening, and join us next time. This kind of stuff. Thank you very much for listening, and join us next time.